Well, good afternoon and happy Thursday. My name is Rob Romanowski. I'm the Director of Sales Operations with 3HTI. And we have a very exciting and special guest today presenting, Garry Hoffman, the principal of 3HTI. Garry is an industry veteran. He was one of the top salespeople at PTC from 1990 to 1999 and was with PTC as they grew very quickly in that time frame. With Creo. So Garry knows these packages and the capabilities of Creo almost like the back of his hand. And then as a reseller with PTC, Garry started 3HTI back in it'll be the 21st anniversary this year. So over 20 years ago, Garry started 3HTI, and we've helped a whole host of companies, which Garry will talk about, including companies like DuPont. Just great relationships with customers over the years by being able to help them. And that's what we're hoping today, is to give you value out of this webinar in helping you to understand what's in these Creo packages. And Garry also has some other information he'll be sharing with you today. So Garry, without further ado, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks everybody for attending. I'm going to just back up for a second. I see we have some existing customers that I'm familiar with, and so welcome, guys. Hopefully we give you a good session today. So I think we should probably retitle this session, and I think the session should say what's not in my Creo package, probably a better way to look at it. So for some of you guys, you may have and may be familiar with the old perpetual licensing scheme that PTC had, and with that was kind of a pain, because if you wanted something new, you either had to pay for it a la carte, or you had to go through an upgrade, and things were sort of sparse in terms of being handed out. With the advent of PTC going to a subscription model, much like we're showing you Office 365 here, you get all these tools like Yammer and all this other stuff that you don't know what the heck's in there. I would also say that there's a lot of tools over the years that PTC used to charge for or would like to charge for, and people just weren't buying them, so they kind of threw it in here. So I'm going to give you kind of a real quick overview, and I'm going to go into some individual slides, but effectively what PTC has is they have 5 primary or base licenses. They have different names.
Can you make it a little bigger, Garry?
Sure. Thank you, Rob. You need glasses still? Anyway, anyway, so you can see there's 5 primary licenses that people have, and again, there's a lot of stuff that comes in these. For me, as Rob said, good or bad, I've been around for a while, and I have the pleasure of working with some customers that I've been working with for 30 years or more, and unfortunately, if they're on the line, don't take this the bad way. It's kind of like when you got to high school, you parted your hair a certain way, and it's hard to get a new hairdo, 20 years out of high school or whatever. So the point is, there's different ways that Creo works. There's a lot of new stuff in there. And a lot of times we take we'll call them more mature customers, and we show them this new stuff, and it's kind of like fire to the caveman. So hopefully, if I do my job properly, that'll come out today. These packages, I'm going to scroll down, have really a myriad of different prices. A couple of these are things where you can get locked to a specific computer. A couple of these, all of these from here on out, you have to float them. And you can see there's a whole myriad of stuff in here. So, the pricing for Creo, I think, is really pretty inexpensive at $27.80 a year. The other scheme here that you have, if you want some of this more sophisticated stuff, which we will eventually get to today, you can purchase this a la carte, and you can add it on where it's locked to a license, or you can purchase it a la carte and you can float it between licenses. So the other thing is that you can use a multitude of license types. If something is created, let's say in advanced assembly that's in this license here, and you want to be able to pull it up in a less expensive license, you can. So you obviously won't be able to create advanced assembly features, but you can certainly manipulate it or work with it. So I think that's a great thing that PTC has. So I decided to mix it up a little bit today and give you guys some new stuff and some beautiful graphics. Here's the problem. There's a lot of slides to go through. So I'm going to go through these very, very quickly. I think if anybody does want us to hand this out, then we can certainly do that, and Rob will record the webinar. But this is another look of what I just showed you, with the basic extensions on here. And you can see with this Creo Design Advanced, you get advanced assembly, you get some fundamental manufacturing, and this Mathcad, it's kind of an inside secret. So if you're a small, medium business, we actually have kind of a less expensive variant of this license. We nickname it Da Uno for Design Advanced, and it comes significantly less expensive. You may have seen that on the Excel spreadsheet, and we don't include Mathcad. Anyway, you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff. So to kind of plow through, as I said before, and just going through this presentation, it's what don't your Creo packages have? So in the packages, just as a fundamental, and this is, again, stuff that a lot of people don't realize, you do get an e-learning license. And e-learning, I'm actually working on a long-time customer to move them to subscription and what I call normalize the licenses to give them a uniform configuration. And they have a couple of these purchased, and I think these are about $450 a year just for the support of the perpetual maintenance. So e-learning comes with every license. If you have a floating license, you get 2. If you have a locked license, you get 1. Just a caveat on this is e-learning is something that's really going away. It's a little bit older. It's basically stuck at about Creo 6. The new standard today, which we'll hit on quickly, is the live learn online, where there's an unlimited number of live classes that somebody can take. That's been very, very successful for us, especially with COVID and distance and all the other good stuff. So your licenses do come with a home use license. These are really a separate license. It doesn't necessarily match what you have. But, why is this good? Let's say you want to go home and, you have nothing else to do this weekend, and you want to go through all these e-learning exercises. You can actually use a license on your home computer. It's also good for trying to bone up your skills, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing, two for a floating, 1 for home. Support. So, this was something that was always provided, which is just to be clear, the support does not come directly through 3HTI. 3HTI, as some of you know, will supplement PTC support. We will, if PTC support kind of falls down, we'll make sure that it comes through. But ultimately, PTC has a hotline. They have its 24/5 support, and that's something that comes with every subscription license. We'll talk a little bit more about Performance Advisor. And then finally, license borrowing. I wasn't aware actually that this was still even in there, but borrowing a license says that you're going on a trip. You're going to another state, let's say, and you are not going to be tethered to the license manager, which would work over a local area, wide area network. You can actually borrow a license, check it out. The license will no longer be available back in the office, but you'll be able to check that out, and you'll be able to borrow that for 180 days. So there's a lot of nuances here, guys. So I'm gonna blow through this very, very fast because there's a lot of stuff here. And some of these slides, I'm going to warn you, are a little bit dated. I mean, we're on Creo 9 now. You can see what, Creo 4 when these things came out, so they've been out for a while. One of the things that I think is, I always used to say, if back in the day when it was like, oh my God, I got to make a 3D model versus a 2D drawing. And we always used to tell people, you get all these deliverables for free. What's that mean? That means, you get exploded views, and you get, things where you can create illustrations or manuals. You get rendered things. And I would put that in the same category. So augmented reality is a big deal. I would tell you that it's all over the place. We do sell software specifically for augmented reality. What's neat is you can publish something, and now all of a sudden you have that object. Instead of being a 3D model or a model that you can spin around, this model is now augmented reality. What is augmented reality? That's physical and digital geometry mixed together. And ultimately what happens is you put this into an environment. The environment is what you set that model onto. And then you can literally walk around and do some things with it. It's a pretty hot thing. you know, my accountant is not a technical guy when he's, you know, goofing with me because he's taking pictures of, you know, lions in the woods, you know, when he's gone four-wheeling and thinks it's cool because that's what's hot on the iPhone. AR is hot. Ask your kids if they know Pokemon Go. So just, you know, a little history. You know, I was around when we had Pro Engineer, and Pro Engineer was always a pain in the behind because we couldn't suck geometry in from other systems. You had to create everything from scratch and get over it, right? Well, those days are long gone. I wish we had this back in the 90s. But PTC acquired a company called Co-Create, which was made in Germany from HP. And ultimately what happened is that they had a different model. They were trying to backfit or retrofit their geometrical engine as opposed to a parametrical engine. And ultimately what happened is that there's the ability to bring in geometry from any CAD system. It will natively come in. And now you have the ability where you can selectively parametrize it. If you're familiar with Pro Engineer, you can give it intelligence and you can work with that geometry. If somebody is using that other system, let's say it's SolidWorks, and they continue to define and create geometry, and you create a model, and that model references that, you bring that back in, voila, your Creo model is going to change. So the beauty is, you know, we're not looking for people to switch entirely to, you know, Creo right off the bat. You know, ultimately, you can continue working with other products. You can work in a hybrid environment. You know, not everybody's going to switch to Creo. And I think this is really kind of a big deal. I'm going to get into what's called flexible modeling in a little bit, but this is Unite modeling. So this thing's a little bit old. It's called Import Data Doctor. To be fair about it, I never really saw a lot of people, you know, get into this, but it's the ability to take very specific data in and the ability to go in and manipulate and parameterize that data. So it's in there. We don't talk about it a whole lot, called Import Data Doctor. Just to make one comment, our company has a service where we use technology and we use humans to be able to take in geometry from any CAD system, and we can bring this data in where it's fully parameterized for Creo. So I think that's a big thing. That was around, you know, early, you know, 2000s. It really didn't work. I'm telling you, it works. And if you have one model that you want to have put in, we can do that. But this thing will repair geometry. It'll modify it. It'll create features, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that I think everybody at this rate knows is that PTC will do 2D drawing. 2D drawing is ultimately taking a view of the model and actually going in and redisplaying the dimensions. Remember, you created the dimensions when you created the model, and therefore they're going to redisplay. You can, you know, use various standards, you know, things like that. So, you know, today, and I've been preaching this for 30 years, you know, some people have really leaned in a way they go, but, you know, hate to tell you, 2D drawings will be, if they're not already, a thing of the past. And what people are doing is they're putting annotations, they're putting GD&T, tolerances, notes, everything right in the 3D model. The 3D model is what's being called the digital thread, which is how people are driving their entire enterprise business. So, you know, the big term that you see is model-based definition. I don't know if that's on here, just that's what MBD means. So, you know, if you don't want to do 2D drawings, you don't have to do 2D drawings. If the shop needs to look at something, 3D drawings can be shared with the shop. This one's a little interesting, and not to get too deep on this, but you know, back in the day, PTC got a lot of competition from SolidWorks. What day was that? About 1998. And they said, we're going to create an inexpensive product or inexpensive configuration. Actually went for $6,000, which compared to $26,000, which is what the other ones were back then. And what they did is they stripped all the assembly capability out of Pro Engineer at the time. And was that a good thing? Not really. So in about the year 2003, they came in and they created a thing called Assembly Performance Extension. And that comes in every license. For example, one of our clients has a circa 1998 license, so I will do my best to get rid of that for them, because it doesn't have even fundamental assembly capabilities. But fundamental assembly capabilities are things like shrink wrapped, simplified representations, things of that nature where you can actually go in and do some basic assembly. So everything I've showed you thus far comes in the standard package. So just one caveat, this does not come in the standard package. This you need the T2 license or Creo Design Essentials. I think this one's a very confusing, very confusing term, because everybody thinks, gee, if I have 90 parts, 100 parts, I need to have advanced assembly. And what people don't realize is if you're working at a larger organization, you're working on an assembly that has teams of people, somebody will ultimately work on the left side of the assembly, somebody may be on the middle, somebody on the right side, and you're trying to kind of orchestrate that. There's also a much different philosophy where you're building assemblies from the top down. You're actually designing parts in the assembly mode, and it's just a fundamentally different paradigm. So with the T1 package, with what I just showed you, that can you can't create parts in the assembly mode, but if you want to build things bottom up, part by part, assemble them together, you can. You know, what I always tell people is there's really not a lot that you can't do using that. It just goes about it in a different way that's less efficient, less optimal. But, I always use the analogy, it's like buying a car with roll-up windows. You know, sometimes you got to reach into the back and roll the window up. It's a pain, it takes longer. So that's really one of the fundamental things that it doesn't do. There is some geometry capabilities that you are provided specifically with this module. And what those are is things like inheritance features and copy geometry. So if you want to make, if you want to say, hey, I want to reference this part, I want you to use the geometry, I want to use the female part of it, you're going to need advanced assembly, even though that is a geometric, capability. It is what's featured in advanced assembly extension. Welding, what's interesting is back in the day, we used to just do weld symbols. Now we can do 3D welds. You can put welding on. You can create single bodies. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but if you want to do that, you actually put it on a welding. A lot of things are welded. Obviously, if you see, things like John Deere tractors and other things. So welding is a big deal for a lot of our clients. Again, it comes in the basic model. This is something that I hit on quickly. It's called flexible modeling extension. A lot of the old time customers, as I mentioned, they don't quite get this. They're happy making parametric models. Ultimately, what this does, it allows you to suck in that geometry from any other system and ultimately go and change it. And always the pain in the behind was with parametric modeling was you got to the end of modeling or you got to the end of designing something, and all of a sudden you wanted to make a fairly radical change, and it caused you or somebody else to understand what the parent-child relationships were and ultimately move something. Well, guess what? You see these late-stage design changes, but boom, you can actually go in and just move these over. So it's really this combination between parametric modeling with your feature tree and geometric modeling, where you're actually doing Boolean changes to your CAD system many times, or excuse me, your CAD model many times late in the design cycle. So freestyle design, again, this really kind of came from, the Co-Create acquisition, but it's the ability to do what's called subdivisional surface modeling. So, when I went to industrial design school, you'd take a thing, we were laughing about this the other day on a demo, but, it would be blue foam or plastilina, where you're really trying to just create these very, fleshed out, very organic type shapes very quickly. And this is ultimately the tool that is in the basic product to do this. Very, very interesting. It's great for product styling. It's a little bit different than what I will touch on as far as some of the other surfacing, which here we go. So inside of every license, there's what used to be called advanced surface extension. And ultimately what that does, it allows people to create profiles, let's say splines, by using control points, and ultimately run surfaces through those control points. I used to do a lot of business, previously with Boeing, and if Boeing was going to take a computational fluid dynamics study, they were going to come out with a wing profile because it's a very mathematically driven surface due to lift and things of that nature. Ultimately, what happens is that they would use advanced surface extension. What I'll get to later is what's called interactive surface design extension, which is more what I'll call alias-like free-form industrial design extension. These tools can be used in conjunction with one another. It's not an either or, but it's just different ways to be able to create complex surfaces. But again, this comes in every package. It's really more driven traditionally where you're driving splines and running surfaces through them. So sheet metal used to be something that it's funny, we have a client still 30 some years later by the name of Hartford Systems that make animal cages and freezers and things like that. And sheet metal was something that was brand new and we used to sell it. Now it comes in every package. Sheet metal, I think, is a very, very usable thing because you can roll and unroll and fold and unfold, and you have various feature types, with that actually specifically go to sheet metal. So moving on, we have Creo parametric plastic part. I think this is a little bit of a misnomer. There's a thing that's been around forever since I was at PTC in 1990, which is called Pro Feature in the old terminology, but we'll use it as plastic part design. Effectively, what it does, it allows people to create shells as a feature. It allows people to put draft angles on things, and it allows people to put rounds and fillets and things of that nature. So I would tell you what PTC has always done and always will do is create plastic type designs like nobody's business. This was always a big deal for us. Guess what? It's still very, very usable. This is something, and I'm going to just give everybody a caution on this one. It's really like a family table functionality. So you can go in and you can have tabular driven design. Works very, very well. The issue is when you have tabular driven design, you want to get this into wind chill. We do not recommend that. So just FYI, but if you want to go in and just change the dimensions here that you can see from this size to that size, this has always been around. Another caution on this, if you're going to do this with assemblies, you do need advanced assembly extension. So this is just simply in the part mode, not the assembly mode. Some of this stuff, comes in the very basic assembly that's created. Some of it actually is part of advanced assembly. But the big deal, a lot of people with other CAD tools have a lot of problems with advanced assemblies. PTC has always been good at this. PTC's model size is about 20% of that of competitive products. So that certainly helps in terms of overall compute degradation. But what we have is we have things that we can create, simplified representations. We can pull things out of memory. We can work on subsets of the assembly. There is a myriad of different tools to be able to manipulate large assemblies. And I always tell people at the end of the day, if you see that John Deere tractor, if you've ever stood next to one, if you've ever seen how many darn parts are on it, they're massive. And at some point, that entire tractor will be put inside a Creo and it will come up. But, when you're designing that, you don't need the whole tractor to be up at all times. So this is something that, is a little bit of an interesting thing. And just as a caveat, we actually sell KeyShot. Why am I mad? Because PTC actually embeds KeyShot right in the very fundamental license. Doesn't have quite everything, but it's still pretty darn good. And this is what's called Render Studio Extension. If you're not familiar with KeyShot, it is absolutely the preeminent rendering package in the CAD world. So really pretty unbelievable ray traced, type images. As I mentioned, I'm an industrial designer by trade. I used to get paid a lot of money. I have still a lot of dried out magic markers or design or Beryl Prismacolor markers. And guess what? They don't need me anymore because any engineer can do these things. Another piece is what we used to call it, I think it's MDX is the term, Mechanism Design Extension. But this is something that, again, comes in every license. I think it's really, really good because it allows you to do range of motion studies. So if you have something that's kinematic, articulates, great stuff. Again, this is something that we used to charge for, and it comes in every extension. It's called Human Factors Extension. I'll use a fancy term for anthropomorphic models. Being an industrial designer, you would have to look at Dreyfus charts and do the 5%, 50th percentile, and 95th percentile human. This also does things in terms of sight. So obviously sight is a big deal. You're designing a dashboard or something ergonomically where you want somebody to be looking at. It's pretty huge. So part of, really, I guess I always thought it was part of the mechanism dynamics, but it's model animation. And this is the beauty to create MPEG files where you can actually show how things are going together or coming apart. Really good for, work instructions for the shop floor. There's a lot of usefulness for this. Performance Advisor, ultimately what this is, and this was mentioned in the very beginning, but it's the ability to, for customers to kind of optimize hardware and software performance, usage, monitor these things. I think if you're a CAD administrator and you're managing multiple licenses, it's really a good thing because you can get all the detailed information as far as how the system's performing, who's using what. There's a lot of different things, total number of users, total unique assets. And that's important because as we sell subscriptions, ultimately on an annual basis, a subscription, you can remix that subscription. You don't want to be paying for things you don't use. And, it allows you to optimize your investment. We talked briefly about Learn Online. This is what we sell. It's $1,300 for Creo. A combination license is $1,600. This is not included in the basic license. This is an add-on. But I think it's important because ultimately this is what people use to learn today in 3-hour virtual instructor-led classes. You don't get penalized if you cancel. You can take the same class as many times as you want. I think one of the things that's important with this is you actually do get certified. I think a lot of people used to really, take pride in that. They put that in their LinkedIn profile, their resume, and it's the same type of thing. But there is a myriad of different classes that are offered. And as I said, this has been very successful for us. So what we're going to do now is we'll try to round out here is just go into some options. So everything with the exception of Creo Learn and with the exception of Advanced Assembly comes in a basic license. And you can get in that game for $2,780 per year. So again, it's not what you get in your Creo license, it's what you don't get. So, and that's where we're going here, what you don't get. So Product Insight's pretty cool. PTC talks a lot about Internet of Things. If I'm an engineer, I'm like, what the heck do I do with Internet of Things? It really doesn't do a whole lot for me. So we work with, let's say Whirlpool, for example, and, you guys have seen, you have some testing center where you slam the door of the appliance shut so many times, you look for it to break, you want planned obsolescence and all the other good stuff. What's real, and then obviously we have things for simulation, structural simulation, etc. What's great about this is if you take a product, you put a sensor in the product, you can actually tie that sensor directly back to Creo. So it's really pretty wild stuff. So ultimately what's happening now, you can actually see when it's breaking, how it's breaking, and all this information can be fed back into Creo so you can actually create better parts. Pretty neat stuff. It's pretty unique to PTC. Collaboration extensions, as I mentioned, you can ultimately take data from any CAD system and put that into Creo. If you want to take the data back out of Creo, these are extensions for the various CAD systems that you can put it back in the native format. Just a caveat here. I mean, if you export it as a step file out of Creo, which you can do, and they suck it in, they can do that. So, it's a nicety that you're going back and, a CATIA V5 model or Siemens NX or whatever. This was something just to be clear, this actually does come in the basic license. I just left this in here, but it's similar to what it does. It basically takes a two-dimensional drawing and it allows you to take the different, top, front, right side, whatever the orthographic projections, and it allows you to actually construct a 3D model from it. Was it something that was a lot of value? Not really, because at the end of the day, somebody could just take off the print and they could just model this. But again, there are things where you want to take something that's really old. You want to at least start with the 2D sketch and to start to build features from that. So that is a basic functionality. Creo Interactive Surface Design Extension. As I said, being an industrial designer, actually have this mouse that I'm using right now, so that's good. But, you know, this is something where you're going to create free-form surfaces. You're going to push and pull these surfaces. What's very important compared to Rhino and Alias and some of the other ones, this is creating Class A surfaces, which can be machined. They can be analyzed. You know, they're great for automotive, aerospace, and a lot of other things. But again, this product actually uses more of an aesthetic to create the surface, not math, where you have to drive something based upon a certain wing profile that I mentioned. But really, really helpful stuff. It's great for industrial designers specifically, and it's a very good add-on. So what's coming, and I'm going to go through this pretty quick. I wasn't going to show this, but there is some very basic composite design that PTC has. This was developed many years ago, actually, for Sikorsky helicopter. It really was not, really wasn't, development really wasn't continued for a number of years. What's coming in Creo 10, that'll be out in May, is ultimately this advanced composite design. We have some clients that, create 3D machines that lay up fiber and things like this. So at the end of the day, this is going to be much more enhanced composite development. It's something that hasn't been done for a long time with PTC, but I would say stay tuned because ultimately it's going to be coming in the May timeframe with Creo 10. Reverse engineering extension. We have some clients last week that were really interested. We have some clients that have purchased this very successfully. So I think a lot of people know that you take a scanner, whether it's a white light scanner or physical scanner where you probe things, you're going to get point cloud data. And ultimately what this allows you to do is to create surfaces and solidify models from that point cloud data. Now, just a caveat on this one. This product is embedded in Creo. It has the same menu as Creo. Ultimately, what this is, it's Geomagic from 3D Systems. So Geomagic is a very leading producer of products. One of our clients reverse engineers turbine blades for jet engines. They actually have Geomagic directly from 3D Systems, and they opted to purchase this because it works in the same menu pick, in the same environment, and works very well if in fact you need to reverse engineer things. This guy right here actually does come in the basic Creo. We used to sell this, so I probably should have put that there. We had a gentleman that worked for us for years. God bless him, he passed away. But he thought this was the best thing since sliced bread in Creo, because what you can do is you can create variants somewhat different than what you saw with the tabulated, family tables. But you can create variants very, very, very quickly to come up with design studies for things. So it's called Creo Design Exploration, really underused, but really powerful. And again, does come in the basic product. Advanced Framework is the ability to take structural steel, C-channels, I-beams, etc. And it has the ability to actually assemble them together and be able to ultimately fit them together and miter the different pieces of them. So if you've seen steel, it's cut out, it's mitered, it's joined. You have weldments. We do have clients that do this. Not everybody. If you're working with aluminum extrusions, etc., very good. But this again is a extra thing. Intelligent Fastener. So Intelligent Fastener was something we used to charge for. Ultimately, it is included in the basic license. And it's something where you're trying to assemble a whole myriad of fasteners, and in a pattern, you want to go in and ultimately assemble these automatically with certain standardization, clearances, tolerances, etc. But boom, it puts those right directly in your assembly. Very good stuff. Again, it does come in the basic model. And I'm sorry, guys. Creo Schematics. So just to be clear, in Creo Schematics, there is a light version that comes in the basic tool. There is a paid-for version that obviously does more than that. And ultimately, this is for two-dimensional P&ID, electrical schematics. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is have something that's intelligent as opposed to AutoCAD, which is a tool a lot of people use, be able to provide a list of wires. And ultimately, with the list of the wire list, where it has different colors and gauges, somebody goes into three-dimensional cabling and piping, and they're able to pick these from a list and route those in 3 dimensions. So speaking of that, we have piping and cabling design. This used to be something we charge for. This is in every basic license of Creo today. And ultimately what that is something that something that goes in and allows somebody to point and click, create bundles of wires, be able to create service loops. This is an area that, you know, in my history has been, I call it no man's land, because the mechanical person, hey, it's an electrical thing, even though technically it's the piping and wires are mechanical, you know, they're physical objects. The electrical person doesn't want to do it because they're not mechanical. So it kind of fits in no man's land. I would tell you from what I see, you know, we're working with a company that does buses, and it's interesting. They have major problems creating these wires, because ultimately what happens is you have a mock-up, you have somebody pulling string through it, you have somebody measuring that, and you have a very complex pegboard or nail board. You know, what this falls out of is what's called harness manufacturing extension. There is a very basic one that comes with Creo. There are 2 other levels above this that ultimately go, depending on the quantity of connectors and the quantity of bundles, that those are optional things that you purchase. Again, big deal, because when you're done, the deliverable is this full-blown harness or multiple harnesses and the entire list of cables. Again, I think it's an area that needs to be improved. This is another add-on that's kind of unique, but you know, today you have a lot of electrification of things. You have electric vehicles. You know, we're working with you know, diesel engine manufacturer that's going electric or will have electric. But effectively what we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate the creepage, if you would, of electricity through 3D design. So big deal, you know, you have things that melt down, you have batteries that have issues. It's what's called clearance and creepage analysis. Mathcad we touched on before. It's really not an extension of Creo. It's a separate product. It is used for mechanical design. I would tell you, I think it's the staple when you get into civil engineering and construction, things of that nature. It does come with the fully priced products. So they would be the T3 through T5 configurations. And as I mentioned, we have a way that we kind of lessen the price of the Creo Design Advanced, and we don't include it with that. Just FYI, it's not included with the Creo Essentials. It is something, as I said, people buy it, they use it on their own. It's about $693 a year. Behavioral modeling is a neat thing. I don't see a lot of people that use this. I don't see a lot of people that know how to use it. But if you have a use case, it's wildly powerful. And what happens is, let's say in the case of you're designing a progressive die, and in a progressive die, you have the same volume of material that may go through maybe 6 different stages to form that material. Ultimately, what this does, it allows you to, let's say, keep the volume constant. So it allows you to say, I want something at a specific value, you know, a certain degree range or something like this. And it will basically go through and iterate the geometry until it gets to that specific form. So really neat stuff. It's advanced. The people that use it really do some neat stuff. Not everybody uses it. Generative topology is ultimately, it is a third-party product that PTC acquired called Frustrum. Definitely the best in the industry. This is, you know, this is pretty hot for a lot of things, but today when you have different manufacturing techniques, additive manufacturing, etc., you know, this, you know, I always tell people when I went to design school was form follows function, and CAD systems really don't work that way. It's really come up with the function, think you know how, come up with the form, think you understand the function. Many times you don't understand the function, and then see if you can backfit the simulation with it. What this does is you actually put in the function first, and it goes through various geometrical iterations to arrive at sometimes some pretty wild types of geometry. Today, in a lot of things, reducing mass, reducing weight is a big deal. It's a pretty phenomenal thing to do that. So Simulation Live ultimately is something that was developed by ANSYS. It's remarketed by PTC, but it's ultimately what happens is it has the ability within 20 seconds to be able to feed something in without meshing and come back and say, listen, this is something that's going to work. It's not going to work. It does stress, it does thermal, it does fluid flow, and it's something to give you very, very quick feedback after you've determined what the form looks like. Pretty neat stuff. What you find is what tends to be a big seller for us is Simulation Live. Or excuse me, this is the advanced. I already talked about that a little bit. We have a couple here where there's a partnership with ANSYS, where PTC has teamed up with ANSYS. I would tell you with this, it's got some really good promise. Not quite ready for prime time. It's still really, maturing as we speak, but it's ultimately embedded ANSYS inside of Creo. So we'll get to Creo simulation extension. Ultimately, I'd advise people there's basic simulation extension, there's advanced. Always go with advanced because they've taken some very basic things out of the entry-level product. The advanced used to be RASNA once upon a time. Really, really good stuff, because ultimately what happens is you're not worrying about meshes, which is where most of the analysis time is spent and most of the expertise is required. And ultimately what's happening is that you are going in and you're specifying a degree of convergence. So if you know how to do FEA, you realize that you run the thing, you look at how far it's off, you refine the mesh in certain areas, you run it again, and then you manually have to say, hey, what percentage am I converged? How close am I? The beauty about this is you can specify what percentage of convergence you want to get to. This will run over and over and over again until it gets to the convergence. Until you have a converged analysis, you don't really have something you can trust. So it's really a pretty neat thing, what it does. It's been around for a while. We have some exceptional results with this. I'm just going to kind of keep cruising through here. Mechanism dynamics is the ability to actually put kinematics into the design, simulate the motion. At the end of the day, what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to get take those forces that you find from the mechanisms, and it allows you to automatically transfer those loads to the structural analysis. Everybody knows with analysis, it's garbage in, garbage out. So ultimately, you're going to get very, very accurate dynamics information that's going to be able to be transferred to the structural analysis to be able to give you real-time stuff. Fatigue advisor is something, as many people know, you have something that goes through a certain degree of cycles, and eventually it fatigues, it cracks, and this is something that adds on that actually predicts that. Flow analysis is something right now that at least in the last month, this month has been something that's been super hot for us. This is ultimately something PTC never had this years ago. It's OEM software from Schematics on the West Coast. Our company has the ability to sell Schematics directly, and they've been a really tremendous partner of ours. But ultimately what happens is, air is a fluid. There's fluids that affect a lot of things, whether it's, cooling an electronic chassis, whether it's something that is, fluid flow. There's virtually cooling and fluid everywhere. And the beauty is that we have something that is fairly simplistic, fairly inexpensively priced for basic fluid. When you get into what's called multi-phase fluids, where you deal with air and water, we're dealing today with somebody that makes sprayers, various types of sprayers. That gets very, very complicated. These guys are able to solve things that other packages can't. What's neat about this, and this is something I have coming up today, is that there's a customer we have that uses what's called Star CCM from Siemens. It was purchased by Siemens. Very, very expensive package. Ultimately, it would take them a couple weeks to get some type of results back because they have a complex application. I don't know what a PhD analyst costs. They hired a PhD from University of Michigan. And ultimately what you find is that, the results come back too late. The person is very expensive. That's the only job this person can do. and they're running software that's $70,000, $80,000 per year. The beauty is what they believe is that they can use this product and ultimately come back, do the same thing that this very expensive person was doing with any member of their advanced engineering technical staff, and they get actually better results in less time. So pretty hot stuff. If you haven't seen it, take a look. GD&T Advisor is something that GD&T is fundamentally part of Creo, but ultimately GD&T is this is an advisor. I think there's a lot of people. Sorry guys, I just got a minor emergency. I think that this is something that ultimately guides people through. It's really like a wizard that helps people if they're not that familiar with how to apply GD&T to models and drawings and how to do it. Tolerance analysis to kind of keep cruising through here. This is really for tolerance stack up. Guys kind of know what that is. We talked about human factors a little bit. This is to actually analyze pieces for human factors. Tool design extension, you could call this mold design, where you actually create the cavity in the core. Talked a little bit. Mathcad actually does tie in. If you want to take the formulas and mathematical information and tie that in with Creo, you can actually do that. I probably should have said that before. We do have mold analysis. This ultimately is MoldX 3D embedded into PTC, allows people to actually go in and do warp, which is kind of the big deal to see where you're going to get air traps and weld lines and things like that for plastic analysis. Mold-based extension. This was always something that was lacking years ago because what you find is creating very fundamental blocks with holes in them for springs and things like this, and the mold bases like DME and Hasco was tough for a parametric system to do. However, now we have a wizard that allows you to actually go in and create the bases here. And again, mold tool design allows you to create the cavities and cores. Progressive die, we talked a little bit about this before, meaning that, different 6 stages of dies. Same thing, uses a wizard to go in, take that geometry and actually design a stamping die. Additive manufacturing is something ultimately that that goes in and allows you to create different geometry inside of this model. So as you see the lattice structures, things of that nature, it actually also goes in and it outputs directly to Stratus's printers, things of that nature. So we're still cruising along here, guys, with a lot of stuff. Prismatic and multi-surface milling, it does come in the T2 package, but it's ultimately for 3-axis milling only, and 4th and 5th axis positioning. This product here does what I just said, but it also does wire, EDM, and it does turning. The complete machining ultimately does 5-axis simultaneous and wire and turning. And then finally, you have high-speed milling extension. Ultimately, what this is where you're going to remove large quantities of volumetric, material, specifically for molds and things of that nature. And NC sheet metal allows you to take the flat sheet metal that you would cut and allows you to laser cut it, punch it, notch it, nibble it, and all kinds of other good stuff. And that's the last slide, guys. So I appreciate everybody for hanging in there. That's a lot of data, but hopefully you got some value out of that.
Garry, really good stuff. It is a lot. You went through it very, very effectively, I thought. And one of the things I want to point out is on the 20th of April, we're going to have as one of the features that Garry pointed out, we're going to have a webinar on kinematic and motion analysis. So I'm kind of excited about that. So Garry, thanks a lot for the overview. I think it's extremely informative, and this helps everybody understand what's in their Creo package in the base license, as well as what's in all these other packages that PTC has. And sometimes it makes more sense to have the base package and get a couple of extensions, or you could have us do the work for you. And because we have access to all these different packages as a reseller, so we could do pretty much any type of design, engineering, or analysis work. We have a really top-notch FEA expert on staff. So it's another thing that a lot of our customers do. Instead of buying the extensions, they have us do the work for them because they're not really doing that kind of work frequently, but they still need help with it. So, and then as they use it more and more, or have that need more and more, then they can get the extension, and we come alongside them and help them get proficient with the software pretty quickly. So if you have any questions or any other need any other information about what you saw today, you can respond to the email that I sent you as the invitation for this webinar. They come back to me, or you can email us at info@3hti.com. So Garry, thank you again for the detailed overview and for your time today. I also want to thank the audience for being on. There is no webinar next week, so we will see you on the 20th for kinematic and motion analysis. Thanks, everyone.